We're in for a treat today. We have as our guest Mae Waymire. Mae moved into Epworth Villa in July of 2017. I noted the pronunciation of her name and I asked her, "What did your mother call you?" And she said Mae, so that's what I call her. Mae is a very talented lady. She is civic-minded. She worked in her community. She's a savvy business lady, and she volunteers tirelessly in her church. And so we're going to get into all of that. But first, Mae, tell us a little bit about your childhood.
Okay, I would be happy to do that. I would like to begin by saying I chose my parents well. My dad was a champion typist, but I didn't take after him in that regard. He was also president of his senior class, but my mother was the valedictorian in the family. And I was born on Buncombe Creek. People that know Lake Texoma know Buncombe Creek, but where I was born was quite different from the one they know, where the big marina is. And Buncombe Creek was just a small creek. It was on my granddad Gary's farm, and that's where my mother and dad lived at that time. And so that's where I was born. I lived there until my dad became the county superintendent of schools in Marshall County. At 24, he was elected to be county superintendent, which was the youngest county superintendent in the state. So we moved to Medill because his office was in the courthouse. And that's where I was. He was there for 2 terms, which was 8 years. So I lived there. It was quite different moving to Medill from a little home on Buncombe Creek. We had electricity. We didn't have electricity there because REA hadn't made it to rural Oklahoma. And I have marks to remind me of that period. My mother was ironing, and she stepped away from the ironing board, and she forgot that I might be really ambitious and try to iron, and I smoothed out what was on the ironing board to be ironed, and then I put the iron directly on the top of my fingers. Oh. And I have scars today to remind me of trying to do things I wasn't big enough to do.
You alluded to your dad's public service. He spent years in public. Tell about that and how that impacted you.
He really was in public service, elected offices for 38 years.
Wow.
He served 8 years as county superintendent, and that impacted his time when he was in the state senate, which I'll try to get to without spending too much time. And then he was in the Senate for 14 years, and then he was governor for 4 years. So I was really bathed, you might say, in politics for a good part of my life. It did make a big impact on me because I really got to understand how important public service is and what you can do.
Was Dale, when did you meet Dale, and was he impressed with the governor's daughter or what?
No, he wasn't impressed with the governor's daughter. I met Dale at a New Year's Eve party when I was a senior, and he was a freshman at OU. And we didn't start dating until he came home that summer, and we started dating. We argued politics all the time.
Oh, dear.
Yes, we did. And then at Christmas, he came to see Daddy and said, you know, he wanted to marry me, and would that be all right? And my dad said, yes. Okay. He thought he was a nice young man. So the following August 4th, 1951, we were married in the First Baptist Church of Medill. The temperature was 112 degrees, no air conditioning in the church, no air conditioning in cars. The candles all melted and just looked like steeples in the sanctuary, and my parents were there till 2 o'clock cleaning the wax off. Then Dale had a job to teach at Lenapaw, Oklahoma, a little school about 13 miles south of Coffeyville, Kansas. And so we moved all the way across the state, away from parents, which that probably wasn't a good idea for newlyweds. And he taught there for that school year, and then he got his draft notice at the end of the year, about April, and he went into the service, and I got my pregnancy notice.
Oh,
and I knew that, I was going to have a baby, and he was going to be leaving. And I stayed with my parents, and finally, the baby was born in November. In February, he came and picked us up, moved us to North Carolina, Fort Bragg, and that's where we lived until he was discharged. That was during the Korean War. And he was in one of the 2 atomic artillery battalions. They had one at Fort Sill, they had one at Fort Bragg. And so we came home. He was out of service. We got home just in time for my dad's kickoff for the governor's race. And so then it was just campaigning until the rest of the year.
Well, tell me about your career.
Okay. My dad, when he got out of the governor's office, he started working on his business, adding some businesses. He added a small trucking company. He had a propane company. Dale was in the propane company. And he had an oil jobbers, that oil and gas jobbers business. And then he had his cattle. Well, there was an insurance company that was for sale. I'm assuming it was for sale, at least we bought it, out at Woodward, and brought it back to Medill, and the president moved to Medill with it, and was there for about a year, and then he decided he wanted to go into the ministry in his church. So I had been working with him, and I told my dad, I just went into the office and I said, I want to be president of the insurance company, because he was going to have to hire someone. You don't find someone who's a president of an insurance company that wants to come to a town as small as Medill, really. And I knew Daddy was going to be boss anyway, so I got into the insurance business and started my own agency for health and life insurance.
Well, you also were very big in your civic community. What were some of the things you did?
I was on the school board for 10 years.
Yes.
And I was chairman of I was president of the Chamber of Commerce.
Right.
And I was president of the Lions Club. And one of the biggest civic activities, which was a joint church activity too, was the founding of the Fran Drummond Daycare Center. There's a factory in Medill that employs women. It's a pants factory, and they had a lot of young women who had children, and there was a great need for child care. Some of us in the church kind of pulled a committee together and said, let's see what we can do about this, because our church had just had a big renovation, and the old sanctuary had become the new educational building, so we had rooms, kitchen, and things to accommodate a daycare center. So we decided to do that, and the janitor of the building told Jack Drummond, a wealthy oil man in Medill, those children shouldn't have to walk up those steps. And so this benefactor called the president and the vice president of our board and said, I want to build the ultimate of a daycare center. I'll give you $250,000 to do it. Mr. Drummond got in touch with the architect. The architect looked at it and said, you can't build it for that. It'll take $350,000. Ultimately, it was $500,000. So we have one of the premier daycare centers in Medill, and I was on the board 45 years. I just came off of it when I moved up here, but it was one of the things that I was the happiest to have a part in, and all of my grandchildren had part of their rearing there, yes.
Well, that brings us to your spiritual life. I know that's your driving force, so tell me what you've done there.
Well, I was involved with the United Methodist Women from the time I started, when I became a Methodist. That's kind of a little story because the Garys all been Baptists, and when Dale and I moved back to Medill and I joined the Methodist Church, they were in shock. Yeah. But anyway, I was really always involved in the Methodist women's organizations. I've always been really interested in advancing the cause of women. And I served 2 terms as the president of the United Methodist Women. I was involved in mission work. I made 4 volunteers in mission trips. I did 2 to the Gulf after Katrina. I did 1 to Haiti. I did 1 to Alaska last year. But what really drew me to the United Methodist Women were their study programs on helping to read things that would help you in your devotional life and your spiritual life, also in Bible studies and what's happening in our world. And I had 1 seminar at St. Paul's School of Theology in Kansas City. This was in the early 70s, and the title of it was A Biblical Faith in Today's Woman. And that was a very interesting time. But I taught Sunday school and, whatever needed to be done.
Well, you have a long history with Epworth, too.
Yes, I do. From the very day that the church voted to build Epworth, I was chairman of the Council of Finance and Administration for the Oklahoma Conference, first woman for that position also. And that is, of course, the council that manages the money. And I felt like when the proposal to build this came forward, that as chairman of that body, I had the obligation to see that we had the kind of legal protection between the institution here and the church. And there was concern among some of the churches that any liabilities, if we weren't viable financially, would come back to the churches. So I was the chancellor, and when that was coming before the board, before the conference, I called the conference chancellor, who is our legal counsel. He was not really comfortable with the contract, but I felt it was my obligation to share that with the conference, which I did. They went ahead and voted for it. I'm glad they did. I have a place to live now.
Right.
And then when Joanne and Burl McNaught came here to retire, they had a cottage, and I would frequently spend the night with them and eat here. So I was very familiar with Epworth. But I'd looked at other places. I really wanted to go to Santa Fe. I even took Joanne with me to help me evaluate them. And the price tag stopped me at the door there. And then I went to Minnesota, where my daughter lives. I looked at a place in Minneapolis and a Presbyterian place in St. Paul. But there isn't a place that I have seen that offers the total kind of care that Epworth offers.
So this would be a good time for you to tell me what you like best about Epworth now that you're here.
Now that I'm here, I appreciate the total care that we have intellectually, spiritually, medically, health-wise and so forth. But what I especially enjoy is entertaining my family at holidays with a sumptuous meal that I don't have to cook or clean up from.
Right. Okay, well, we have really enjoyed having you, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you for asking me.
Well, Mana Mae, it has been a joy, as we knew it would be. So thank you so much for taking your time today and for sharing all this great history.